بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلاة ربي وسلامه ورحمته وبركاته على ذاك النبي الكريم نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد, as we continue in the explanation of Hamawiyyah, the great Imam Abu Abbas Taqiyuddin Ahmad ibn Abdul Halim, Ahmad ibn Abdul Halim ibn Abdul Salam ibn Taymiyyah al-Harrani al-Dimashqi al-Numayri, the one who died 728 after the migration of our Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. As we start this class on 7:24 p.m., Thursday, October the 6th, 2022, which agrees with the Islamic calendar, where it's the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal, 12 ربيع الأول عام 1444 after the migration of our Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. We continue in the affairs of what the great Imam Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah Abu Abbas Taqiyuddin Ahmad ibn Abdul Halim ibn Abdul Salam ibn Taymiyyah al-Harrani al-Dimashqi al-Numayri, the one who died 728 after the migration of our Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. We were discussing how Ibn al-Majishun, after Shaykh al-Islam conveyed his belief and his position in regards to the names and attributes of Allah Jalla Jalaluh, you'll find that he embarked upon the aqidah of Abu Hanifa, and what was his belief in regards to the names and attributes of Allah. Likewise, you'll find that Shaykh al-Islam strategically wrote this in the affair, or to clarify to those who so-called follow the great Imams, or the four Imams of the four Madhahib that is known with the people. You'll find that he starts with the most important of all of their affairs of what makes them the great Imams. What makes them great A'imma? Their Aqidah, their belief. If their belief wasn't intact, they wouldn't be from the A'imma. They wouldn't be from the great scholars of the Madhahib. The affairs of fiqh is not what raises a person. The affairs of Aqidah is what raises a person. The affairs of his belief and his creed, and how solidified and sound it is. That's what raises an individual, and that is the affair that the followers need to be attentive of before the affairs are considered subsidiary, or the branches, if you want to say, the fiqh issues. Because the fiqh issues are the branches. The aqidah is the foundation and the roots. That's what you need to be important, and that's what you need to be attentive of. What was his belief? Why would you want to follow him in fiqh, but you oppose him in his foundation? That doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to follow you in the branches, but I'm in opposition against you and what made you the great Imam. Doesn't make any sense. So that's what you'll find that Shaykh al-Islam will elaborate on. What was the belief of Abu Hanifa? And we'll talk about that in a minute. As Ibn al-Majishun, as he want to finish out what he said, that those who are well grounded in knowledge, وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ الْوَاقِفُونَ حَيْثُ انْتَهَى عِلْمُهُمْ الواصفون لربهم بما وصف من نفسه التاركون لما ترك من ذكرها لا ينكرون صفة ما سمى منها جحدا ولا يتكلفون وصفه بما لم يسم تعمقا لأن الحق ترك ما ترك وتسمية ما سمى ومن يتبع غير سبيل المؤمنين نوله ما تولى ونصله جهنم وساءت مصيره. Excuse me, everyone, I'm still a little bit under the weather. وَهَبَ اللَّهُ لَنَا وَلَكُمْ حُكْمًا وَأَلْحِقْنَا بِالصَّالِحِينَ. Allahu Akbar. So, Ibn al-Majishun, as we finish out in his great, profound statements, where, like we said, he clarified his belief, his creed. And he said, those who are well grounded in knowledge, and those who stop where their knowledge makes them stop. So their knowledge of what they were granted is the affair that bounds them, meaning they adhere to what Allah and His Messenger said. And those who have given the descriptions for their Lord, bima, in accordance to what Allah gave as attributes of Himself. التاركون لما ترك من ذكرها, and they also leave off in what Allah left off of mentioning. We gave an example of this yesterday. What do you mean by that? For example, Allah Ta'ala informed that He's above and that He descends every night. He descends in the third part or the last part of the night. Allah did not inform us of how He does it. Allah did not inform that. So, if Allah did not inform that, then we do not what? We don't discuss it, nor do we what? Indulge in it or partake in those matters. Because Allah did not inform us of that. So that's what your father Ibn al-Majishun is mentioning. So he says they stop or they abandon in what Allah abandoned, meaning left off or remained silent about, of His mentioning. He says also they do not deny a characteristic of what Allah has called Himself out of rejection, nor do they what? لا يتكلفون وصفه بما لم يسمى تعمقا, nor do they exceed the bounds and overburden themselves of a description of what Allah Ta'ala did not name Himself by going too deep. تعمقا, meaning that they go excessive in those descriptions until they start to exceed the bounds, as we mentioned. يَنَ الْحَقِّ تَرْكُ مَا تَرَكَ, the truth is leaving and remaining silent about what Allah left and remain silent about. And naming what Allah named. Now listen to what Ibn al-Majishun says. He makes a great point here. Now listen to this. He says, whoever follows, and he now mentions the ayah which is in Surah An-Nisa, ayah number what? 115. And whoever follows a way other than the believers. And Allah Ta'ala gave the warning, we will turn him of what he's turned to. And we will burn him in hell, and what an evil abode it is. So in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying or clarifying the obligation of following the companions and understanding the religion in accordance to how they understood it. And that if you now traverse or take a path or understanding of Islam other than theirs, Allah Ta'ala gave this severe warning and threat to what you wanted to turn to and you chose as another path other than what Allah has made an obligation for you to adhere to. You embark upon that path, we will turn you to it. We will increase you in it and lead you astray in it. And we will burn you in hell, and what an evil abode it is. So the affair of Islam in regards to the proper understanding is adhering to these principles and what the great Imam Ibn al-Majishun mentioned, rahimahullah. So that is what you'll find. Now this is what Shaykh al-Islam goes on to say after he completed this profound statement of the great Imam Ibn al-Majishun. So now Shaykh al-Islam stops. So now we finish, because I know everyone's probably saying that speech was long. That was a statement that was long by Ibn al-Majishun, because we've been speaking about it for about 4 weeks approximately. But the statement is great, in which you'll find that Shaykh al-Islam used it. Excuse me. That he used it as a proof to substantiate his call to the Muslims at that time. Because we know that Shaykh al-Islam was calling the Muslims back to what was correct in order for Allah to restore the honor to the Muslims after they abandoned it, and then the disgrace descended upon them because of them abandoning the proper understanding of Islam. As a result of them abandoning the proper understanding of Islam, Allah Ta'ala gave power to their enemies over them, to dominate them. So Shaykh al-Islam had stood up in order to what? Call the people to what was left off. And he was bringing his proof. And we said from the proof that he gave here was now conveying the statement of the great Imam Ibn al-Majishun after he conveyed all the evidences which was in the Quran, in the Book of Allah, the Sunnah, the Message of Allah, And he brought the statements from the tabi'een, of those who had taken knowledge from the companions, and the atba' tabi'een, and those who followed the tabi'een. Now, those who came after that generation, he brought the statement of those great scholars that also met them and had taken knowledge from them and followed their same path and their same understanding and their same creed, and what was their position and what was their creed. And from them was Ibn al-Majishun, because he lived during the time of the tabi'een and the atba' tabi'een, and he lived during the time of the great Imam Malik. And Ibn al-Majishun was from the great scholars of Al-Madinah at the time, the city of the Prophet ﷺ, in the close generation of the Messenger of Allah. Because those are the affairs that we have to also analyze, to look at those who lived during that time as close as possible, during the time of the Messenger of Allah and the great generations that the Messenger of Allah himself praised. Because you cannot be the best of generation unless your creed and your belief was sound and intact. The Messenger of Allah only gave praise to generations that their aqidah and their belief were intact and sound. And those who followed them also have extracted that same khayriyah, that same characteristic of being the best of this ummah, if they follow, adhere to those three generations that the Messenger of Allah praised. And when we say adhere, we mean they adhere in their belief, because that's what makes everyone Muslim. Your genetics, or what validates you as a Muslim, is your belief. If that's nullified, then what? Your Islam is nullified. Or if that's tainted, then your religion, your Islam will be tainted. And the affairs in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in his book, that the first things that will be investigated on the day of resurrection, rather the first things that will be investigated when you die, as soon as you're put under the dirt in the grave, is your belief. The angels will ask, what's your belief? What's your religion? What's your prophet? Who's your Lord? All of those are affairs of belief. All those questions are connected with what, everyone? Creed, belief. The first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will investigate is the affairs that's connected with creed and belief, and it being intact and it being sound. Is it clear what I'm saying, everyone? So those are the matters that Shaykh al-Islam focused on in this book, especially the matter or the subject connected with al-Asma wa Sifat. Tayyib. So Ibn al-Majishun said this great speech, and we're going on to mention. So then he mentioned and said, now listen to this, he made dua for all of us. He made dua for himself and for the ummah. He said, وَهَبَ اللَّهُ لَنَا وَلَكُمْ حُكْمًا وَأَلْحِقْنَا بِالصَّالِحِينَ. The ayat which in the book of Allah, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us and you hukm, meaning sound wisdom and understanding, and may Allah allow us to join those who are truly righteous. So that was the end of his speech, rahimahullah. So now let's go on. Now Shaykh al-Islam starts to resume. If you look in the book, وَهَذَا كُلُّهُ كَلَامِ ابن الماجشون الإمام فَتَدَبَّرْهُ وانظر كيف أثبت الصفات ونفى علم الكيفية موافقة لغيره من الأئمة وكيف أنكر على من نفى الصفات بأنه يلزم من إثباتها كذا وكذا كما تقوله الجهمية أنه يلزم أن يكون جسما أو عرضا فيكون محدثا. So Shaykh al-Islam goes on to say, after he just completed the naql, or after he just completed mentioning the statement of Ibn al-Majishun, he said, all of this that you just read is the speech of the great Imam Ibn al-Majishun. He said, contemplate on it. Tadabbarhu. Contemplate on it. Look how he affirmed the characteristics of Allah, and he negated the knowledge of attaining how they are, in agreement with the other statements from the great Imam, from the great scholars of this religion. And look to how he reprimanded those who negated the characteristics of Allah. And he also now brought ilzam بأنه يلزم إثباتها كذا وكذا. And also those who negated the characteristics of Allah by them saying that if we were to affirm it, it necessitates such and such. We already clarified this. We'll clarify it again in a moment. He says, just as the deviant sect of the Jahmiyyah say, that if you were to affirm these characteristics, it necessitates, for example, that Allah has a body, or that Allah came into existence after He did not exist. Or this affair of what? عرض فيكون محدث. And I'll just explain that. طيب. So listen to what Shaykh al-Islam goes on to say. وفي كتابه الفقه الأكبر المشهور عند أصحاب أبي حنيفة الذي رواه بالإسناد عن أبي مطيع الحكم بن عبد الله البلخي قال سألت أبا حنيفة عن الفقه الأكبر فقال لا تكفرن أحدا بذنب ولا تنفي أحدا به من الإيمان وتأمر بالمعروف وتنهى عن المنكر وتعلم أن ما أصابك لم يكن ليخطئك وما أخطأك لم يكن ليصيبك ولا تتبرأ من أحد من أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا توالي أحدا دون أحد وأن ترد أمر عثمان وعلي إلى الله. طيب. After Shaykh al-Islam completed the statement of the great Imam Ibn Majishun, he now embarks upon the statement of Abu Hanifa in his book called Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar, the greatest fiqh. What was Abu Hanifa speaking about when he said the greatest fiqh? The greatest of all fiqh, or the greatest of all understanding, is your belief. So this affair he was speaking about was now embarking upon clarifying what was his belief. So Shaykh al-Islam is now bringing another argument against those who say that his call is something new, or something that's been newly introduced. And he's bringing these statements to those who so-called say that they follow the four imams in their aspects of fiqh. He said that's irrelevant if you don't follow him in his belief. The most important thing is that you adhere to their belief before the affairs that's connected was considered branches of the religion, which is fiqh. Doesn't make any sense. Follow him in what he believed. That will make you a so-called sound true follower of the madhab if that's clearly what you now intend, or if that's your claim. You don't follow him in the belief in those affairs that he believed in regards to what validates his religion and made him great in the first place. Because if the affairs were now tainted by certain corrupt ideologies, he wouldn't be a great imam at all. So follow him the affairs of what made him great, which is the affairs connected with the fundamentals and the affairs connected with the sound conviction of what raises the individual and makes him a alim and a respected scholar in the first place. Because there's no scholar that's well respected except that they have sound creed. Otherwise, they wouldn't be considered a sound, great scholar of the religion at all, if he did not adhere to what the message of Allah ﷺ was upon. So he said in his book called Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar, the greatest of fiqh, by Abu Hanifa Al-Nu'man. His name was Nu'man ibn Thabit. That was his name. A lot of people don't know Abu Hanifa's name. His name was Nu'man ibn Thabit. To be as we know the book called Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar. We'll talk about it if we have some more time. It has a lot of shuruh, there's a lot of explanations to it. From them, it's from the deviant sects who's actually what? From them who actually explained it. Because we know they try to use it in order to so-called aid their belief. But in actuality, you'll find what's so strange is so contradictory, or what contradicts itself, is that a lot of the affairs of the books of creed, for example, there's a book in Aqidah that's called Aqidat al-Tahawiyyah, right? Aqidat al-Tahawiyyah is from those books that if we was to finish Hamawiyyah and maybe Tadwiriyah, we could go into what? Tahawiyyah. Tahawiyyah is probably the most highest level where you can go in Aqidah. You can't go beyond that. Anyway, to make a long story short, Aqidat al-Tahawiyyah was explained by Ibn Abil Izz al-Hanafi. So notice he was what? He followed the madhab of what? Abu Hanifa. Ibn Abil Izz al-Hanafi. He explained it, right? What's so strange is that those who are upon Maturidiyya use that book and explain it. And what's so strange is what they believe, what's in the book, makes war with what they're upon, but they still use it. It's very strange. So the only reason probably why they only use the book is because it's what? It's Hanafi. So it's just basically blind following. So when they try to explain the book, they explain the book with generally, or they try to water it down as much as they can. So the affairs we'll talk about in a minute. What's so strange is, similar to that, is those who also blind follow the madhahib. They blind follow them in the what? In the affairs that's connected with the branches of the religion. But why would you blind follow him in the branches, but not blind follow him what made him great in the first place? It doesn't make any sense. And if he was to tell them to sit down with them, they would act like, no, but he's a great imam. Why don't you follow him in his aqidah? Why are you following him in affairs that he possibly made mistakes in or certain mistakes? Why follow him in his creed? That's what made him the imam, and that's what you should follow him in. And if you wanted to blind follow him in affairs, it would be in affairs of creed, not in the affairs of fiqh. It doesn't make any sense. And if they rectified their affairs of aqidah, they wouldn't blind follow him in the affairs of fiqh. That's to let you know that their aqidah is what? It's unstable. It's not solidified. It has some what? Problems in it. Because like we said, if you rectify the aqidah, you wouldn't blind follow him in his mistakes in the affairs of fiqh. Rahimahullah. So that's what we're saying. And those mistakes, we know, as from the scholars, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them a reward if they make a mistake. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we know, gives them 2 rewards if what they said was correct. But still, it's binding upon the people not to follow them in that mistake, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave it and gave them a reward for it. It's still binding upon the people not to follow them in those affairs at all. But the affairs we wanted to clarify in these statements is to show how these affairs are very strange and they contradict themselves. So one shouldn't blind follow him in the affairs of fiqh, whereas you deny and make war with him, it would make him a great scholar in the first place. It does not make any sense. Is it clear what I'm saying, everyone? طيب. So there was a book entitled Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar by Abu Hanifa, Nu'man ibn Thabit, rahimahullah, by the Maturidis. Sharh Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar lil-Maturidi. But there's another book called Minah Al-Rawd Al-Azhar lil-Mala Ali Al-Qari Al-Hanafi. His book is good. للملا علي القاري الحنفي. And other than that. However, what I wanted to just speak about, that this book called The Greatest Fiqh by Abu Hanifa has two narrations. One of them is by Hamad ibn Abi Hanifa. Has 2 riwayas, or 2 narrations. Riwayah Hamad ibn Abi Hanifa. That's number 1. The second is Riwayah Abi Muti' al-Balkhi. This is who Shaykh al-Islam is speaking about. Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah, here. So the first one is Hamad ibn Abi Hanifa, and the second one is Abi Muti' Alif Ta Ya Ayn Muti' al-Balkhi. He was the second one that also narrated the book Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar by Abu Hanifa. Both books, no doubt, you'll find that none of them are void of some of the scholars speaking about their actual chain being traced back directly to Abu Hanifa. However, because I wanted to get into a little bit of benefit. In fact, let's keep going. Both books you'll find, both narrations of those who narrated this book called Fiqh al-Akbar by Abu Hanifa, you'll find that it's not void of what certain scholars speaking about its actual chain, returning back to Abu Hanifa. From the ulama, you'll find من ينفي نسبة الكتاب لأبي Hanifa, from those who deny it actually being a correct ascription to Abu Hanifa is the great Imam al-Dhahabi. The great Imam al-Dhahabi, who's also from the students of who? Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah, the Imam al-Dhahabi. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَنْسِبُهُ إِلَيْهِ مُطْلَقًا كَشَيْخِ الإسلام. Some of them say that it actually has been ascribed. And like we said, the details of that, we'll get into it a little bit later, inshallah. Because I don't want to go too deep in that affair. But you'll find that those who are upon the madhab al-Hanafi, this is the book they usually what? Ascribe to those in regards to the belief of Abu Hanifa. The belief. Because I wanted to talk about the inscription of the book being ascribed to Abu Hanifa. Some of the scholars who deny it, but some of the scholars who do say that it's absolutely been ascribed and it is correct. From them, and I'll just say it quickly because I didn't want to go too deep into it today. From them is Shaykh al-Islam himself. He said the book is, the inscription of it has been authenticated and ascribed to Abu Hanifa. From them is the scholar who explained the book that I just mentioned 5 minutes ago, Aqidat al-Tahawiyya, Ibn Abil Izz. Ibn Abil Izz, he was from the scholars of who are upon the madhab al-Hanafi. He said that the book Fiqh al-Akbar has been properly ascribed to Abu Hanifa. So you have Ibn Abil Izz al-Hanafi and Shaykh al-Islam himself saying that the book has been what? Accurately ascribed to who? To Abu Hanifa. There's others that I wanted to give a little bit more details, but we'll talk about that a little bit later, inshallah. Just to give a little glimpse of who Abu Hanifa is, because I know that some of the Muslims out there have heard the name. It's time to call out there already? Wow, time flies. Well, you go back, you could call it back here. Stand up. Oh, okay. Wow, time flies. الله أكبر الله أكبر اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آتي محمد الوسيلة والفضيلة وبعث المقام محمود الذي وعدته. طيب, from those who say that the book has been accurately ascribed to Abu Hanifa, Shaykh al-Islam, the proof of that is in the book Hamawiyyah itself. If you look in Hamawiyyah, Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah used it in order to what? Substantiate the affair pertaining to Abu Hanifa calling to the correct, or calling to his belief. Notice that he cited his book, Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, in Hamawiyyah itself. So this is to let you know that he believes that the book Al-Fiqh al-Akbar has been accurately ascribed to Abu Hanifa, because he mentioned it in the book Al-Hamawiyyah itself. So Shaykh al-Islam says that inscription of that book has been accurately what? Traced back to Abu Hanifa. طيب. Abu Hanifa, we know, was from the fuqaha, those scholars who stood out, of course, in jurisprudence or fiqh, from the people of Iraq. And he was considered the Imam of Ashab al-Ra'i. And I'll talk about this later. The Imam of those who are the companions of al-Ra'i. Al-Ra'i meaning opinion here, for lack of better words right now. But Imam Ashab al-Ra'i, the companions of those who had an opinion, meaning those who were able to bring answers to affairs that's connected with fiqh and those matters that's pertaining to it. He was from the great A'imah al-Arba'ah, from the affairs of the scholars of the Madahib, as we know, in which you'll find that people follow these days, in those times, and also currently today. As we said, his name was An-Nu'man ibn Thabit. That was Abu Hanifa's real name. An-Nu'man ibn Thabit. ibn Zolta, excuse me, al-Taymi al-Kufi. He was ascribed to Kufa. All these are where's Kufa, everyone? In Iraq. They say that he was from the children of Furs. He was from the children of Furs. Furs meaning, wait, excellent. The children of Furs. What's Furs, everyone? Persia. Persia is currently where? Iran. But the Persians, their land was in that type of what? In that land. That's why you'll find that a lot of people these days that come from Iran, what do they speak? Farisi. They speak what? Persian. They speak Farisi, Lugha al-Farisiyya. But anyway, they say that he was from those children. However, he was originally from Iraq, or he was from the scholars who stood out in Iraq, from the scholars who stood out in the place that we know currently today is of Iraq, and he was also from Kufa, which is also in Iraq. But at any rate, just to make a long story short, they say that he met some of the companions. From them was Anas ibn Malik, radiyallahu anhu. He said that when he embarked upon Kufa, Kufa, which is currently in Iraq, he met Anas ibn Malik, radiyallahu anhu. So that's just a short glimpse of Abu Hanifa, because I don't want to get too deep into that, because that's not the point of why we're mentioning this. So I don't want to get sidetracked with this type of issue today. For perhaps tomorrow or next week, inshallah, we'll try to touch on these details a little bit more. But however, the point of why Shaykh al-Islam is mentioning this is for a reason, and I don't want to lose sight of that. So he says, الذي رواه بالإسناد عن أبي مطيع الحكم بن عبد الله البلخي. So Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah and Hamawiyyah, he's saying those two narrations that are well known concerning this book called Al-Fiqh al-Akbar. From them was upon Hamad ibn Abi Hanifa, as I mentioned, and number two was Abi Muti' al-Balkhi. This is who he's citing here. So if you look, what does it say? عن أبي مطيع الحكم ابن عبد الله البلخي. So Shaykh al-Islam is affirming its ascription most definitely to Abu Hanifa here. So قال, now listen, سألت أبا حنيفة عن الفقه الأكبر فقال لا تكفرن أحدا بذنب. So now Shaykh al-Islam is using this upon those so-called followers of the fiqh al-Hanafi, those who follow the so-called Hanafi fiqh. So he's saying, I asked Abu Hanifa about the greatest understanding of the book entitled Fiqh al-Akbar. He said, do not declare anyone to be a disbeliever due to a sin they committed. So who's he refuting? The deviant sect called the Khawarij, or the Wa'idiyah. The Wa'idiyah. He was refuting them. He said, do not declare one outside the fold of Islam or to be a disbeliever or unbeliever due to a sin they committed. وَلَا تَنْفِي أَحَدًا بِهِ مِنَ الْإِيمَانِ. And do not negate no one, removing them from the fold of Iman. وَلَا تَأْمُرْ. Now listen to this. So-called وَلْتَأْمُرْ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَى عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. He said that you do this out of clarifying by saying that the reason why I remove one out the fold of Islam, because I'm commanding the good or forbidding the evil. Who's he talking about? He's talking about the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila used to declare the rulers, or the so-called, in their eyes, the unfit leaders of the Muslims, to be outside the fold of Islam in the name of so-called, or under the guise of commanding the good and forbidding the evil. So they would use that title in order to what? Justify what they were doing of evil. Is it clear? So that's what he's talking about here. He said, don't do that out of so-called claiming I'm commanding the good and what? Forbidding the evil. He says, وَتَعْلَمْ أَنَّمَا أَصَابَكَ لَمْ يَكُنْ لِيُخْطِئَكَ. He says, and also that you have full knowledge that what has afflicted you, it was not meant to miss you. Or that what you attained, meaning it was meant for you to have it. وَمَا أَخْطَأَكَ لَمْ يَكُنْ لِيُصِيبَكَ. And that what missed you or what you didn't attain, it was not meant for you to have, or it was not meant for it to happen to you. As it means all those meanings. So what is he saying here? He's talking about affairs that's connected what? With the divine decree. So he's refuting the deviant sects of those who saying that what? These affairs are negated, null and void. No. Allah did not write anything down for it to be in the affairs that will take place within this existence. None of it is destined. All those deviant affairs, notice Abu Hanifa is what? Clarifying the error of it. And it's a mistake. So he's declaring what, everyone? His belief here. So the lady goes on to say, Abu Hanifa, وَلَا تَتَبَرَّأْ مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِنْ أَصْحَابِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. And do not set yourself free. Do not separate yourself. Or set yourself free from any one of the companions of the Message of Allah. So who's he speaking about? The Shia and the Rawafid. وَلَا تُوَالِي أَحَدٍ دُونَ أَحَدٍ وَأَن تُرُدَّ أَمْرَ عُثْمَانُ عَلِي. And he said that do not take some of them to be awliya where some others are not. وَلَا تُوَالِي أَحَدٍ دُونَ أَحَدٍ. Saying some of them are good, but these are evil here. La. Is it clear, everyone? That's what he's saying here. All of the companions, is Allah is pleased with all of them, without any exception. All the companions of the Message of Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with them. So don't say that these ones are good and these ones are evil and bad. Is it clear, everyone? So then he says, وَأَن تَرُدَّ أَمْرَ عُثْمَانُ عَلِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. And that you leave the affair with Uthman and Ali to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was the book in which you'll find Abu Hanifa clarified his aqidah, his belief, entitled Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, the greatest understanding. What's the greatest understanding, everyone? He's speaking about belief in your aqidah, in your sound creed, and that you die upon that. That your creed in which you believe, that you die in that state and you meet Allah upon the sound state of your belief is the most greatest of all affairs, and the most dangerous if you was to die upon other than that. Is it clear, everyone? Play. 3 more minutes, so we'll stop, inshallah. So notice the book that Shaykh al-Islam said that this book entitled Al-Fiqh al-Akbar is a refutation against all these deviant sects, in which we said that the book was authored by Abu Hanifa himself. So he said, مَا لَمْ يَسْتَحِلَّهُ, meaning do not declare anyone to be outside the fold of Islam due to a sin he or she committed. Except for the exception, what, everyone? Unless they declare it to be halal. That's something different. If a person declares an evil act to be halal, that would necessitate them being outside the fold of Islam. Right, everyone? If a person says drinking intoxicants is halal, that statement right there would necessitate what? Nullify one's Islam due to the fact that Allah had what? Legislated this affair and made it unlawful for the people. For one to come now and to so-called follow up on the law to change the ruling, that would nullify your Islam. Even if you didn't drink a sip of khamr in your life, but you declared to be halal, that's worse than a person who deems it to be evil, but they still fell into it. Is it clear? What I said was clear as a nugget. It's evil, more evil that you believe that saying that intoxicants and having a firm belief in your conviction, in your belief that, for example, it's just an example, that intoxicants is halal, even if you did not drink it a day in your life, but you believe it's halal. That's more evil than the person who fell into it, even though they have the belief that it's what? Haram. Is it clear, everyone? All of it is evil. We're not trying to say that this is better and that's better. No, we're relatively speaking. What's more higher in the level as far as the magnitude? That's it. All of it is evil. But we're saying what's worse is the creed and the affairs of pertaining to what? Some type of deviation in your creed is worse than a person that feels bad. Maybe they fell into it 5 times or what have you. But at the same time, their creed is still intact. They just became weak. And maybe perhaps that person, if Allah gives them tawfiq, they might abandon it. And they might feel bad, and Allah Ta'ala give them tawfiq to what? Return to what's correct, and they will abandon the act. The point of the matter is what was the incentive to push them to abandon it? Except that they had the sound creed, the belief that was haram in the first place. That's why they left it off. Because they knew in the back of their mind, what? I'm wrong. I shouldn't be doing this. This is wrong. And I'm afraid that if I meet Allah upon this, maybe I might be under the punishment of Allah. Who knows? But the point of the matter is that if a person makes these affairs halal, that's worse than the individual falls into it, even though they believe it's haram. Is it clear? جيد. سواء يرتكب الذنب يفعل المنكر أو بترك المعروف. He says, especially if the person falls into it. He's talking about, as we said a couple of minutes ago, that when Abu Hanifa said in his book Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar, if the person now so-called claims that they're going to use it under the guise of so-called commanding the good and forbidding the evil, which we'll talk about and explain next week, inshallah, those affairs are all incorrect. Now what he says is, إِذَا أَذْنَبَ عَبْدٌ ذَنْبًا بِأَنْ فَعَلَ مَنْهِيًّا. We already talked about that, alhamdulillah. You'll find that the great Imam, Muhammad Aman Jami, he even gave good details, which, alhamdulillah, what I just mentioned now, he gave it more clarity in this regard. He said this. He said, the person who believes these affairs are haram. He said, for example, وَإِنَّمَا يَكُونْ كُفْرًا مُرْتَكِبَ الْكِبِيرَ كُفْرًا دُونَ كُفْرًا. He said, you'll find that the kufr in which the Salaf used to call sins, kufr. Used to call sins kufr. Now listen, we'll stop here inshallah. But I want everyone to understand what I'm saying. Understand what I'm saying, and if you can write it down, write it down. But just understand first. The Salaf in the past used to call actions or major sins kufr. Why? Because the Message of Allah, in certain narrations, he even labeled certain acts kufr. So they were just following what the Message of Allah said. For example, the hadith which is a Sahih Muslim, but the Masjid of Allah said, he said, "Sab wa sibab al-Muslim fusuq, wa qitaluhu kufr, wa qitaluhu kufr." Insulting or cursing a Muslim is fisq. It's major sin. It's major sin. Fighting a Muslim is kufr. Hadith is a Sahih Muslim, right? So listen. Also, the hadith which is a Sahih Muslim, where the Masjid of Allah said, لا ترجعوا بعدي كفارا يضرب بعضكم رقاب بعض. Do not return after me as kuffar. Disbelievers here, the word kufr was used, where you're striking the necks of one another. So the Message of Allah said that fighting a Muslim or hurting him or striking the necks in order to hurt him or even possibly kill him is kufr. The Salaf came use the same statements, such as the word what? Kufr, on these type of acts. However, what they intended by is what? Kufr of the lesser kufr, meaning the kufr of the actions which is considered major sin. But not the affair, or not the type of kufr that will exit you out the fold of Islam. Because there's two types of kufr. You have the kufr of what? The lesser kufr, which is the kufr of the actions, not of the belief. And if you want to call it sin, major sin. You understand? Then you have the highest of kufr, which will nullify Islam. Which is what? The affairs of polytheism, declaring affairs to be haram after Allah made it halal, or vice versa. Those affairs are clear. You have the kufr of the actions, even though they're not outside the fold of Islam, just as hypocrisy. We know if a person lies, that they nullify the Islam? No. But you consider it from the major sins, where it's considered hypocrisy of the actions, not of the what? Of the belief. Hypocrisy of the belief will remove you from the fold of Islam. Hypocrisy of the actions, what? If one falls into one of those two traits of lying or what have you, doesn't nullify Islam, but you still have a trait of what? Of hypocrisy. You understand, everyone? Similar to that is kufr. You have kufr of the actions. Kufr of the actions of which the Salaf used to use in the past, but they did not what? Consider it the type of kufr that will exit you outside the fold of Islam, but it was kufr of the actions, or a major sin, but they followed the text based upon what the Messenger of Allah understood from the text that he clearly said. So the Messenger of Allah used the word what? Kufr for these type of actions. But they understood the proper understanding of it. The Khawarij of the deviant sects of later took the statement and they applied the word kufr to the greatest kufr that were introduced outside the fold of Islam, which is dangerous. But the mere fact that the Messenger of Allah called these acts of kufr should be enough for one to be on guard of not to fall into it. So the Messenger of Allah was given an affair in order for one to abstain from it. And to what? Restrain himself from committing the act, because the mere fact that the Messenger of Allah called it kufr should be enough for a person to what? It would give them enough fear. If the Muslim fears his Lord and fears the hereafter and what's to come, those acts, when they hear that the Messenger of Allah said this act is an act of what? Kufr, it should be a deterrent for them to abstain from that act, even though at the same time it does not nullify Islam if you did not declare it to be halal. Is it clear what I'm saying, everyone? Gee, we'll stop here, inshallah. Is it any questions about the lesson? Any questions? No questions? Alhamdulillah. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وأشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.